Last Sunday, we took part in our first ever online endurance race. And not just any endurance race, it was multiclass. And as if that wasn't challenging enough already, we decided to do it on a laptop with FPS dropping as low as 25 at times. The race took place in Assetto Corsa through World Sim Series at one of the most legendary tracks in motorsport, Monza. The decision to enter came just 2 hours before the green flag, after only a handful of laps in a completely new car. And speaking of the car, instead of jumping straight into GT3s or Porsche Cup cars, we decided to go for the slowest class on the grid to give ourselves more time to react, observe traffic, and adapt to everything happening around us. Our choice was the Audi S3 Saloon from the British Touring Car Championship, the car driven by Jake Hill in BTCC. Front-wheel drive, 350 horsepower, 420 Newton-meters, nearly 250 kilometers per hour. And one more thing we discovered after joining the server. There was no ABS, no traction control, nothing to help us when things get messy. Which made our first endurance race just a little bit more interesting. 2 hours of survival at Monza were just about to begin. We took pole position in our class, and the start itself wasn't too bad, at least off the line. The GT3 cars starting behind us quickly made their way through, and we headed towards turn 1. That's when the chaos began. About 15 cars headed into turn 1 ahead of us, and it turned into absolute chaos. Multiple GT3s and Porsche Cup cars were colliding, spinning, and flying into the gravel trap everywhere we looked. We played it a little too safe, trying to avoid damage and waiting for the GT3 field to clear the way through the first chicane. Meanwhile, the driver who started second in our class used the escape road and gained a massive advantage. But it was only the beginning of the race, and we knew we still had 2 full hours to fight for victory in our class. Heading towards the next chicane, faster cars quickly caught back up to us, and we decided to let them through under braking, avoiding unnecessary time loss and, more importantly, avoiding contact. About 20 minutes into the race, the fastest GT3 drivers had already started lapping our class as we were charging down Monza's main straight. And despite our car being capable of nearly 250 kilometers per hour, nobody in the BTCC class could realistically go faster than around 225, which only made the speed difference between the GT3 and BTCC cars even bigger. The lapping traffic actually worked in our favor, helping us close the gap to the class leader. He made a mistake at the exit of the chicane at the beginning of the lap and ran wide into the gravel. That was the moment we started to smell blood, and we began to close in quickly. Just a few corners, we cut the gap in half. We really had the pace, and it was clear the leader was starting to feel the pressure as our car grew bigger and bigger in his rearview mirror. At the end of the main straight, a Porsche Cup car caught us at the worst possible moment, right at corner entry. It cost us a bit of time, as we had to sacrifice the early phase of the chicane, while our rival could stick to his normal line and get lapped cleanly through Curva Grande. The gap opened up again, but there was still a chance to bring it back. Another GT3 car could potentially help us close in once more as we headed into Rogia and the Lesmos. Our rival made a mistake under braking and locked up the wheel, and then had to let a BMW M4 GT3 through in Lesmos. It cost him a lot of time, and suddenly the gap started to close down significantly. We were getting closer and closer, while two more GT cars were also closing in to lap us again. Thankfully, this time we were caught at a good moment on track, with no major loss of time and no need to back off. McLaren passed us before the braking zone, while the BMW was too far back to affect us. We went late on the brakes to close the gap even more. We also discovered something important. The BTCC car allows a completely different line than GT3's through this chicane. That gave us a massive opportunity to gain time, and we used it to keep closing the gap even further. Everything looked great until that moment. The BMW came through to lap us, and just then, the class leader hit a McLaren in Lesmo 2, sending it spinning back across the track. Forced to take wider line, we had nowhere to go and hit the McLaren, collecting solid damage to the front of the car. That incident changed the race completely. The car was damaged and the leader pulled away again. Going into Variante Ascari, the loss of downforce pushed us slightly wide, but nothing major happened. We quickly adapted to the reduced grip and decided to stay out. The car was still competitive, and pitting now would have meant a two-stop strategy. With the fuel tank good for around 65 minutes and roughly 80 minutes still to go, it made more sense to continue the stint and manage it from there. Let's take another look at that crash. The BTCC class leader couldn't slow the car in time and hit the right rear of the McLaren, sending it spinning directly onto our line. After the race, watching the replay back, we realized something important. We could have let the BMW through a bit earlier. That would have given us more space and flexibility through Lesmo 2, and might have helped us avoid the whole situation. It wasn't our fault, but the lesson was clear. In multi-class endurance racing, you don't just think about your own race, you have to think about everyone around you. A few laps later, the leader made another mistake, this time under braking into Parabolica. We were still quite far back, but the gap came down again, and it gave us a bit of hope. After that mistake in Parabolica, the leader made another one, this time braking into the first chicane. He had to take the escape road, which initially looked like it would cost him time, but in reality, it actually worked in his favor. Going straight with a small slalom between the boards and slowing down just enough to avoid a penalty was quicker than taking the full chicane. As a result, the gap opened up again instead of closing. Heading into Parabolica, we had an Audi R8 and a Porsche Cup car closing in from behind. Our plan was to take a wider line and let them both through cleanly, but we locked a wheel and ran slightly off track. That forced us to back off and avoid a second track limits violation, putting us in a very stressful situation where another infringement would have meant a drive-through penalty. The Porsche didn't expect us to suddenly slow down there and ended up following us instead of passing on the inside. Approaching the halfway point of the race, the GT3 class leaders, Porsche and Ferrari, helped us close in on our rival after he made another mistake. The gap came down once again, and the chase was on all over again. Heading into Roja, the leader made another mistake, locking up under braking and running over the curb. He lost a lot of speed and time, which allowed us to close in even further. We even tried distracting him with flashing headlights. It didn't really work, but by that point, we were already much closer anyway. Despite the damage, we were still much quicker. Exiting the Lesmo 2 and heading towards Variante Ascari, it looked like we were about to get right onto the gearbox of our rival thanks to the slipstream. But we were wrong. The front end damage was severe enough that the slipstream effect was basically gone. We simply couldn't gain anything on the straight. Both of us were pushing incredibly hard. Into Parabolica, he locked up under braking, while we went wide ourselves, almost running off track and having to slow down noticeably on corner exit. But despite the mistake, the leader still managed to pull away. Into the Lesmos once again, and suddenly, the gap disappeared all over again. The leader had to let a Porsche through at the entry of Lesmo 1, costing him a lot of time and forcing him slightly wide on corner exit. Heading into Lesmo 2, we were right there. Both of us could feel the pressure. Unfortunately, the damage once again hurt our straight line speed, leaving us unable to launch an attack. Half a lap later, we were closing in once again, heading into Roggio, with the GT3 car passing both of us before the braking zone. The leader braked much earlier than we expected, forcing us into a sudden, heavy braking moment to avoid crashing into the back of him. And without ABS, the rear wheels locked instantly, and the car completely lost stability. We saved it, but we still don't know how. We lost a bit of time again, and immediately had to start pushing once more, almost ending up in the gravel at Lesmo 1 as the overheated tires began losing grip. The second hour of the race had just begun, and our rival immediately headed into the pits. We decided to stay out, hoping to overcut him. 2 laps later, we headed into the pits, entering pit lane carefully to avoid a drive-through penalty for speeding. And that's when everything changed. It turned out the repairs would take 5 full minutes, and by that point, we could no longer cancel them.
Five minutes later.
After 5 incredibly long minutes, we rejoined the race 2 laps behind the leader, with no hope left for a strong result. Technically, we were still running third in class, but only because there were just 4 BTCC cars in the race, and one of them had already retired earlier. Heading into Lesmo 1, we kissed the wall on the inside, but thankfully the car was completely fine. completing lap after lap, with no real motivation left beyond simply finishing the race. The two Porsches fighting for the overall lead suddenly started an intense battle at the front. And honestly, that fight entertained our stint quite a bit. Not wanting to interfere with their fight, we moved all the way to the inside before the Lesmos and braked slightly on the short straight after Rogia to let them through cleanly. We just wanted to watch that battle for as long as possible, even though they disappeared into the distance pretty quickly. With around 20 minutes to go, we caught up to the car, running second in our class. It was clearly struggling with some kind of issue, and we managed to unlap ourselves, although we were still one lap down. After an incredibly long and uneventful second stint, we finally began the final lap of the race. And then, almost poetically, we got passed once again by the same McLaren involved in the crash that destroyed our chances for victory an hour and a half earlier. Funny how endurance racing works sometimes. One moment can completely change your race. One small mistake, one unlucky situation in traffic, one damaged front bumper, and suddenly the fight for victory becomes a fight just to reach the finish. But maybe that's what endurance racing is really about. Not just raw pace, not just winning, but surviving the chaos, adapting to problems, learning from mistakes, and continuing to push even when the result is already gone. 2 hours earlier, we started this race with almost no preparation, on a laptop struggling to keep stable FPS, in a completely unfamiliar car with no ABS and no traction control. And despite everything, the damage, the frustration, and the lost opportunity, we still made it to the final lap of our first ever endurance race. The checkered flag was waiting just ahead. Maybe we didn't win this race. Maybe the result wasn't what we hoped for when the lights went green 2 hours earlier. But endurance racing was never only about winning. It's about surviving difficult moments, learning under pressure, adapting when things stop going your way. Because sometimes your biggest achievement is simply refusing to give up. We started this race with almost no preparation. On a laptop, struggling for FPS. In a car we barely knew. We made mistakes. We lost time. We got damaged. We lost our chance to fight for victory. But we kept going, lap after lap, corner after corner. And in the end, that's what endurance racing is really about. Not perfection, not easy victories, but resilience. Because every difficult race teaches you something. And every finish line is another step forward. This was only the beginning.